Hello and welcome to this free bonus video in advance of the launch of the Poker Workbook Final Tables. My name's Ben Hales and this video is intended for anyone who wishes to learn a structured process for improving their ability to think in ranges. You don't have to purchase one of the workbook packages to benefit from this. You don't even need the workbook itself. You could be working with your own examples. Maybe you've played some hands live you want to analyze, or maybe you've got examples from your online database. That's absolutely fine. This is intended to help you as well. For those of you who have already purchased the workbook, then this is going to be super useful for showing you how it was intended for you to work through the book. For those of you using Hold'em Resources Calculator or perhaps another piece of ICM software, this is going to be useful for giving you ideas as to how you can get the best out of your software. Similarly, for range software, I'm using Flopzilla today, but if you're on a Mac, you might be using Poker Cruncher. This will be really useful for showing you how to get the most out of that software. So this is not just a sales video to try and promote the new book. This is very much a video showing you the right process for going about improving your game. In the top right hand corner of the screen, there's a template that I'm going to be filling out. It's free to download if you want one. And it's just intended to keep a record of the study that you're doing. So if you do go back into the hand, you've got an easy way of accessing the data. For those of you not already aware, the workbook consists of 3 sections and 40 example hands. Hands 1 to 10 focus in on your range. Hands 11 to 30 deal with your opponent's range. And in the final section of hands 31 to 40, it's range against range analysis. So what I'm going to do is choose a hand from the middle section, which is quite a challenging section. That's why there's 20 questions in this second section. And let's choose hand number 13. And what I want to do is run through this question very quickly. I'm not focusing on the answers. I'm focusing on the process, and that's what you should be focused on as well. If you want detailed answers to these questions, you will need to purchase the Titan package, which comes with 8 30-minute videos that answer some of the questions in this workbook as given by myself. This video is all about the process that you're going through. And in the top right-hand corner is the template. I like filling in the template so that I'm keeping a record of the study work that I'm doing. Today's the 1st of September. And it's very useful for coming back to, if you ever want to come back to a question, you can store your ranges in the template and easily copy and paste them back into Flopzilla. Focus in for a second on the question. You sit at a newly formed final table of this online $109 main event. There are mainly tight players remaining, and you've learned quite a lot about them. So you can see at the table, you're holding ace-10 suited from mid position, and the button calls your raise, and the action stops there. So focus on the button, who's playing VPIP 17, pre-flop raise 11. He's a weak, tight, aggressive player. He stabs at many pots, value bets relentlessly, but is capable of folding when required. Okay. Over about 80 hands, he's only 3-bet a few times, and none of those hands went to showdown. Your job is to build the range for this player at each stage of the hand. So the first part of the question is pre-flop, and it will progress through the various streets. But at the beginning, you're dealing with his pre-flop range. So at the bottom of the page, you need to write in what you think the villain's range is, what percentage of hands that is, and how many combinations that is. And if you get used to thinking in terms of percentage and in terms of numbers of combos, it's really, really useful for your overall understanding of ranges in the long run. Now you'll notice that there's also a leading question. Do you think the button just calls or 3-bets? And gives you 3 hands. So one of them's the suited ace, one of them's a pocket pair, and one of them's a king X hand. So this is a feature of the workbook throughout. You're given these types of leading questions to help you with your range building. Now I'm going to show you very quickly how to build this hand inside Hold'em Resources Calculator. So first of all, I do File and New, and then I click on Advanced Hand and Next. You'll notice that there's a whole bunch of data from the previous hand that I was studying. I'm now going to enter in all of our data manually. After a few minutes of delay, HRC comes back with the following incredibly powerful data. Today I'm just going to show you the very bare bones basics of this, but there's a whole load more to explore. If you're interested, then again, the Titan package from the workbook features the videos where I go into much more depth using HRC, and also a webinar which teaches you how to adjust your pre-flop ranges perfectly. In this situation in the question, we've raised with a range that looks something similar to this, and we expect the game theory optimal calling range to be something that looks similar to this for the button. The 3-bet range, by the way, looks something like this, and I think that a weak tag actually would be quite close to this for a 3-betting range. They may be flat calling with some of those stronger hands, 10-10, perhaps flat call, Jack-Jack, Ace-Queen, Ace-Queen suited. So there's a few hands that may fall into their flatting range, but actually this player that's described, perhaps more through luck than judgment, probably has a 3-betting range that is quite close to this recommended game theory optimal range. So the next part of the process is to plug this data into Flopzilla. So let's look and see what I built in Flopzilla for this player's calling range, and you can see here these are the hands that I chose. I didn't include the bottom pocket pairs, they may well be there. I didn't include some of the suited aces, they could be there. There could be some weightings you could apply here. I've not applied any weightings. For today's purposes, I want this to go fairly quickly. These are the ranges I've selected. To put this into the template, I click range and then copy, paste into here, and I note at the bottom of the screen the range was 12% and the number of combinations 151. So I enter that into the document and move swiftly on to the flop, which is Jack of clubs, 7 of clubs, 6 of hearts, which I enter into Flopzilla here. And what we see now is the way in which our opponent's range has connected with this flop. So he's got a set 7% of the time, top pair 27.5%, etc., etc. And this is really useful data for understanding how often he's going to continue on this board to our continuation bet. As you can see, the action over on the left-hand side, we bet 5 big blinds, and he calls into this 8.4 big blind pot. And we're given the leading question of, remembering he's a player who tends to raise or fold, what sorts of hands do you think he's calling with in this spot? What do you think he does with? So if we think about top pair hands, does he call with those? I think he probably does. Straight draws, it could go either way. He could call, he could raise with them. I don't actually have many in there. I've got 8-9 suited as a decent straight draw. So there's not many straight draws that I expect him to arrive here with. And then there's King 10 offsuit. I didn't actually include that in my pre-flop range. That could happen to you, where one of the leading questions asks you about a hand you don't have in your range. Personally, I think he would fold King 10 offsuit in this spot. I don't expect him to continue. If I were answering this question very seriously, I would have him sometimes raising, sometimes calling with sets, 2 pairs. I'm going to just leave all these hands in his range for now. I'm going to include pocket pairs below top pair, and I'll have him fold out everything else. So that leaves him calling with 49.6% of his hands. And importantly, note this is part of the process. Click on this button here. That takes us through to the next street. To enter the information into the template, it's Control-Alt-T, copy and paste that, and then that becomes their flop range, which we can now say as a percentage of the previous range was about 50%, and combos thereof, press the tab key, and all that turns into combos, and you can see at the bottom of the screen 65 combos remaining. Not that many, right, as we move through to the turn card. And you can see the turn card is the 9 of spades, so we enter that into Flopzilla and we see how that affects his range. Come out of combo mode into percentage mode. Look at that, he's got top pair now 59% of the time. He's really often sat with that specific hand, and sometimes he's got a set, which is a worry, of course. So what do? We continuation bet 11 big blinds into the 18 big blind pot. That looks very normal. And the button calls again. The question states, hone in on the very strongest hands that the button has. Think about the texture of the board. How many of them would he call this turn card with? The leading question then asks us, do you think he calls or raises with 2 pair or better? And I think at this point, he probably is going to raise with a set. I haven't got him with any 2 pairs, but I would think he would raise with those hands as well. Remember, he's a tight aggressive player. It's possible he could call, but it would be unusual on such a wet board. So I'm going to take them out. I think top pair he might consider still calling with, and really there's not a lot else that I think he calls with. So really frequently when we see him flat call, I think he's got top pair. 7-8 is suggested in the question. Yeah, he might call with that hand if he'd started with it, and if you've got it as a starting hand, that's fine. You should continue with it. I personally, I didn't start with that hand, so I can't start entering it in now, and that's important. The hands are linear. The range is, you start with a pre-flop range, and you can't start adding in hands later. And that's an important part of doing these exercises. So right now, I'm restricted to him holding just very much top pair weighted hands. Control-Alt-T and copy and paste, and once again that goes into the document here. It's 75% of his previous range, and in combinations it's now just down to 46. So don't forget to click on this button to take us through to the river, and then we can move on to the final part of this question. You should be recognizing the pattern now. It's the same process repeated. I'll take that out of combo mode, and you can see we think he's now got top pair 78.3% of the time. Two of spades comes on the river, and he's heavily weighted towards those hands. When we check what hands is he going to value bet with here, so 15 big blinds into the 40 big blind pot, make sure you understand the question, focus in on that for a second. And the question asks, which of his remaining hands would he attempt this bet with, and which of them would he check behind? So okay, if he's holding top pair, Jack 10, would he value bet? Open for interpretation. You might say no, you think he'd check behind. You might say yes, you think he'd make this value bet. Or you might say sometimes he's going to make this bet. I think my answer would be sometimes he's going to make this bet. Perhaps 30% of the time I expect him to make this bet with a top pair. Your answer might be different. That's fine. Remember, it's not about the answer, it's about the process. For the other hands, again, you can answer the question. I personally don't think he gets here very often with 9-8. I don't think he gets here very often with 6-5. But if he did arrive here with those hands, I would expect him to check behind. I would not expect him to be value betting. So I think at this point, when he makes this bet, he's very, very heavily weighted in terms of top pair hands, to the point where I can't conceive of him holding a different type of hand. And you start to see how incredible this whole process is, that you can really hone in on what he must be holding. He's got top pair. I just don't believe he's got a stronger hand. He's not the type of player who's going to be flat calling that turn with stronger. So this is a really great opportunity for us to do what we do on the river, and I'll move straight through to the final part of this, where we check raise all in, and the question asks us, do you think this is a great play or not? And personally, I think this is a great play, because I think our opponent has to fold top pair. Even if he thinks we're bluffing some of the time here, he's going to know we could also have a set, and it's going to be impossible for him to call off with a one pair hand. It makes this river check raise an incredibly good play. I should tidy up my form. I've got to put the filter through there, Control Alt T, and pop that into my template, which was 78%, and combos thereof 36. Now I noticed actually I made a mistake there on the turn. I've entered the range in without hitting the filter properly. So what we do is we come back. This was the range at the turn, and Control Alt T that, and re-enter that in here. That was the correct range. We've found a spot which is very generic, where we've held a flush draw, barreled through the turn. We've honed in on our opponent's range and thought, yeah, you're really weighted towards top pair. We think you've got a one pair hand. We don't think you've got any other types of hand. You're very vulnerable to a check raise all in. You're going to have to fold out all those hands. This is a spot you're going to be faced with in the future. If you find similar hand, you can make this play. It's going to work for you. That's the whole point of doing these exercises. You find these spots and you learn something. Sometimes the learning points are really clear and obvious. Sometimes they're more hazy. So this is the type of range analysis that you should be doing off the table to improve your game. My name's Ben Hales. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. If you are interested in purchasing the workbook, if you haven't already, go to Postflop Poker, find all the details there. Thank you very much for listening.